Hello and welcome to the Gifted Podcast. I am your host, Niraj Mulani, and in the Gifted Podcast, I speak with elite athletes as we try to challenge the misconception that athletes are just some people who are talented or gifted with special abilities at birth. Every week, I am joined by an elite athlete as we try to break down what it truly takes and means to be an athlete. If you're an aspiring athlete or just a casual sports fan, you will definitely enjoy this podcast as I get candid with athletes about their journey, their achievements, moments of heartbreak, and most importantly, moments of hard work and perseverance. Guys, I'm happy to share that the Gifted podcast is now sponsored by Zenkai Sports, the new disruptor in the performance apparel world. And they have come up with a great offer for the listeners of this podcast. So, stick around till the end and find out about this exciting offer. Well, today I have with me triple Olympian and an Olympic record holder in rowing, Callie. Sally and I talk about how rowing found her instead of the other way around. We also discuss how Sally dealt with not one but two fourth place finishes at the Olympics, narrowly missing out on medals. Sally also reflects on getting diagnosed with a potentially fatal brain malformation and how she relied on her athlete mindset to recover from the illness. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Sally, to the Gifted podcast today. We're really excited to have you. How are you doing?
Yeah, fantastic. It's fantastic to be here. It's a real honor.
It's our pleasure. And there is a lot to learn about you as an individual as well as an athlete. So let's start right at the beginning. I'm very keen to understand what memories do you have of your childhood and what do you think were the early influences or habits that were installed at that time for you as an athlete?
Yeah, I grew up in middle class Australia with an older brother who was quite talented at sport. My parents, I think, taught us both great lessons and instilled great habits into us. Really, habits that I guess you could say focusing on the small habits and not the big habits. So, how you spend your morning, how you talk to yourself every day, how much sleep you get, what you read, what you choose to eat, who you let into your life. And they really taught me that those small choices add up over time and compound over time and determine your future. So with an older brother that was incredibly talented at sport, I guess he set the bar high. And as a little girl, it was fantastic. I was striving to keep up with him. And I guess the combination of small habits that compound over time and having a big brother that set the bar so high really was a great upbringing in what I think in middle class Australia.
And what all different sports did you play while you were growing up with your brother or otherwise?
Yeah, growing up with my brother, I guess I just followed everything he did, and he loved his track and field. And I loved that sport, track and field. I must have started when I was 5 or 6. It's that lovely combination of speed, strength, agility, endurance, power, flexibility. And I think it's a really great foundation that many Olympians have actually to enjoy that individual competitive side and really pushing. And the focus has always been a PB and a personal best. And I think that's a really special thing when you're young to be able to focus on that personal best with such a nice diverse group of sports. But also in Australia, netball was a big one, AFL, Australian rules football, all of those things I dabbled in. I really think the most important thing is that young kids don't specialise too early. And so I pretty much played every sport that I could get my hands on. And I wasn't a talented kid. I was just one that loved working hard and loved my sport and loved participating and loved all the mates that I met. Yeah.
But I think, like you said, it the athlete that wanted to work hard and not with just talented, but focused on hard work and perseverance, which is the true epitome of the athletes that we are trying to interview here on this podcast.
Absolutely. And my brother, he was very talented, but he didn't have that drive. And I now, as an adult, I look at young children and you don't want to peak too early. You really want to watch those kids that persist and persist and persist, because I think they're the little legends out there that are going to go far, because you learn so many fantastic lessons in life. When you face so many obstacles, you're not talented, you just keep getting back up and attempting to have another go. I think that is definitely a great mindset lesson that we can learn from a young age through sport.
Right. And like you mentioned, not peaking too early, but developing those early skills and the ABCs of the sport and becoming a more well rounded athlete in your early years, and then taking those skills to a specific sport like you did. So I was very keen to understand how you found rowing, or rowing found you in that case.
Yeah. So as mentioned, many of the Olympians that I've come across, they didn't begin sport at an early age. They were doing many sports, and they only specialised later in life. So being a rower, I didn't find out even about rowing until I was must have been 16 or 17 years of age. It's quite an interesting story. I was sitting in my final year of high school at the start of the year, and a lady stepped up onto stage at an assembly, and she said 3 questions to the whole school cohort. Are you tall? Are you 16? And would you like to go to the Olympic Games? So she was looking for tall, lanky 16-year-olds, and she felt that within 4 years' time, she could teach them how to row and train them up for the Olympic Games. So I put my hand up pretty quickly, and I was taken down to the local sports institute. Now, this talent identification program was happening all over Australia, and it was in preparation for the 1996 Olympic Games. So the year was 1992. 400 kids were measured up. Arm span had to be longer than your height. Power and endurance were tested on a stationary bike. And then also your parents were interviewed to see if they were dedicated to drive you to rowing training. So it was pretty exciting. Those 400 children were narrowed down to 10 boys and 10 girls. And we actually thought our future was set, because they said in your first year, you need to learn how to row and then be good enough to get to the World Junior Championships in Norway. In your second and third year, you need to be good enough to get to the World Senior Championships in the US and Finland. And then the fourth year of this program, we expect you to be good enough for the Olympic Games in Atlanta. So I was pretty excited. I thought my future was set.
Well, that's very interesting. And given that, you had the physical attributes to be a great rower, and this program basically helped you figure out that this could be something that you could do. But I wanted to understand, in your head, when did you start thinking, in spite of all the advantages that you had, is rowing is something that you'd want to pursue? Or when did that switch happen in your head, where this could be your path to greatness?
That's a great question. I had never considered myself a rower, and I knew nothing about rowing. By this stage, at the age of 15 and 16, I was a cross-country runner. I loved my distance running, and I'd made a few state teams. Nothing like an Australian team, but I was really enjoying running at an elite level in my community. But I guess when combined with rowing, it was actually a great combination to have such a strong aerobic base, and be so tall and lanky. I'd never realised whether I'd be suited to rowing. But with the right coach and the right equipment, and being sort of fast track in the rowing program, I quickly experienced success. So I guess the decision was made for me to let go of the running and take on the rowing. And being on the water was something that blew my mind. Like those mornings at 5 a.m. when you're the first on the water, the sun's rising. The fact that my brother and my parents knew nothing about this sport, it was suddenly my discipline, was another thing that was really important to me, that this was my project and no one could give me tips or criticize or anything. This was my thing. So that uniqueness of being on the water was definitely something that sold me in the sport.
Right. And you took to the sport very quickly and intuitively, which saw you break into the national team within 2 years itself. And you were also improving year on year very quickly. So a single scull silver in junior world champs in 93 and fourth in the quads in 1994 world championships. What was this doing for the confidence of Sally going into the Atlanta Olympics?
Yeah, great question. This talent ID program was so successful, and the athletes that went before me the year before had all won gold at the World Juniors. So coming home with a silver made me quite hungry and angry and determined to go back to the World Championships the following year and prove myself as an athlete. So it's interesting how the mindset changes when the bar is so high. So, getting to the World Juniors within probably I think it was about 16 or 17 months of learning to row, and standing on the podium with a silver medal was not good enough in my head, which is, I look back on and I'm, quite ashamed by, but I was definitely not happy with a silver. So the mindset was very high, at that stage. So then going to the World Senior Championships the following year in a crew boat and getting a fourth, again, I felt, all right, this is not what I want. So the Olympic Games was definitely something that I was pretty determined to stand on that podium after a silver medal and a fourth. Unfortunately, it didn't go to plan. With the Olympic Games, we have heats, then we have repecharges, and then semis, and then finals. And the heat went well. We had the second fastest time, which was really good. Great place to be. Unfortunately, in the repecharge, we caught a crab, and catching a crab is rowing is when your blade hits the water on the recovery and causes your boat to stop dead, which meant that we didn't make the A final and ended up in a B final, which was quite disappointing. And it was something that really knocked me for six, because I really felt that Olympic Games I'd worked so hard for, trained, I guess, for all of 4 years for, and it didn't go to plan. Obviously, in the big picture, it's a pretty good result, 9th place in your first Olympic Games.
Right. And how was the team dealing with this performance, and how did you guys rate it in your own eyes, considering that you guys had really high ambitions, or at least aspired to medal at this Olympics?
Yeah, well, that's right. We were 4th place the year prior, and then at those Olympics we had the second fastest time in the heat, and also in the final, in the B final, our time was very quick. It would have given us a good spot in the A final. So it's pretty disastrous. But look, we were all of 21, the age of 21. We sort of went home and refocused. I hopped on a road bike for a while and a track bike, and I did some track racing and some road cycling just to switch off. I spent the next 3 or 4 months just getting immersed in different sports and realising that there is more to life than the Olympic Games. But I then, re-narrowed my focus and got myself back on the Australian team, ready to see if I could get on that podium again.
Right. And like you mentioned, after Atlanta, you were trying out different sports, but you also changed the discipline and went back to single scull again and won gold in under 23 world champs. I wanted to understand
That's
how
right.
the training varies when you are competing in quads versus in a single scull.
Yeah, in Australia, and I'm sure other countries are the same, we spend most of our season racing single sculls. And then just prior to the World Championships, the selectors will select the top 4 scullers and put them in a quad. So all year, your teammates are your competitors. And then just a couple of weeks before the World Championships, they need to be your sisters, your best friends, and you need to be able to trust them and join together as a team. So it's quite an interesting mindset lesson to be competing against your teammates. But I think at the end of the day, it creates some pretty amazing athletes when in the domestic season you've got such great competition. And we all relocated into Sydney to train together. And I think that's a major aspect of a successful program, is when you can relocate and train with the best people. So you're never, the benchmark is really high. But going back to your question, there's no difference between a single and a quad. Or a double. We pretty much have the same technique, the same training. Everything is the same.
Right. And how easy is the transition from single to quads, considering that there is now a very important aspect put into the mix of things, which is teamwork? And like you mentioned,
Yeah.
becoming teammates with your competitors for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it takes a lot of maturity to go from a single scull to a quad, or even a single scull to a women's 8 or a men's 8. A lot of maturity. As I said, they are your competitors all year round, and then to come into a crew environment. But I have to say, a great team is created by a whole lot of diverse personalities. We had someone that would, mediate, someone that would solve problems, someone that would I guess, add the ego, and another person that would, I guess, had the encouragement. So we're all from diverse backgrounds, the quad that I stayed in for many years. And I think that's what makes a brilliant team, when you've got so many diverse backgrounds that all come together to create the whole picture. Yeah.
And this actually saw you win a bronze medal in quads at World Championships in 1998, and another bronze medal in double scull in 1999 World Championships. Was all this success across disciplines a testament to your adaptability and being a great team player? Or were there any other traits that you think were factors behind this success?
Yeah, look, going back to the habits that I learned as a young child, I can't say more about those small habits. It's what we do every day that counts. And I'm sure the athletes that are listening to this podcast would agree. It's what you do in the morning. It's what you eat. It's how you talk to yourself. And if you can do that day in, day out, and I was a real stickler for habits. I would write habits down and I would tick them when I achieved them. I had a training diary, which I think is something essential that every athlete has. And it doesn't have to just be about the physical side, it can be about the mental side too. And I think the mental side is something that's definitely underrated. We really need to put as much effort into our mental training as our physical training. And when I say the mental training, it's things like what went well today? What are you proud of today? What do you appreciate? Who is someone that did something kind for you today? It's that trying to scan the world for all the positives. And not focus on the negatives. And the negatives, you just need to be setting some goals for tomorrow. So if something didn't go well today, you need to set a goal for tomorrow to improve that. So it's that mindset was absolutely enormous. And I think, looking back, I think my success was definitely due to being a real stickler for habits, and a little bit sort of an OCD stickler. And I say that with a kind heart, because perhaps my family thought I had gone too far, I was too obsessed, but sometimes you need to be obsessed to be the best in the world.
Right. And it's interesting that you also bring in the mental aspect to this. I wanted to understand, while you mentioned that it is, you know, really important for you to list down all these aspects, not just about physical training, but also taking the time to reflect on things, on how you're feeling and who did something nice to you on that day. But how do you train these mental habits, or train yourself to be cognizant of all these things consciously?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really do think writing, as opposed to using an app or just thinking about it, is so much more powerful. When we write, I think the connection is so much stronger. And even today, when things weren't going well for me over that COVID period, my well-being was feeling a bit low on the scale. I tried to pick an app up that had daily habits on it, and it just didn't work, because I don't think I was as mindful. When you actually write down things and tick boxes, I think it really sticks a bit longer. So pretty much from a young age, I've kept a journal. And even today, I keep a journal, just trying to rewire my brain, just trying to keep all those positive pathways. Because I think all of us, no matter what's going on in our life, we're all moving up and down that scale of +5, -5 on that mental health scale. And I think that journal idea is a great thing, whether it's elite athletes or just, for work or for your personal life. We all need to keep on top of, our thoughts and our self-talk, and all of the positive, scanning the world for those positives that are around us.
Right. And I think it also helps every individual keep a track of how they are improving on a daily basis. And that is something that I'm sure would have contributed in a very impactful way for all the wins that you got in 1998 as well as 1999, which I'm sure would have brought some additional pressure to you going into the home Olympics of Sydney. What sort
Yeah,
of
look,
mental frame of mind were you in at that time? Were there any external pressures or internal pressure that you were building going into a home Olympics?
yeah, look, we went in, as medalists, went into the Olympic Games as medalists, so we were favourites. Look, my best friends lived in South Australia, so they drove a car all the way from South Australia up to New South Wales in Sydney, and with banners wrapped around the car and dressed up and, sequined outfits. And my parents came up, so the pressure was was massive. The crowds were enormous. Everyone you knew came to Sydney to watch you race. So the pressure was there. But having been competing at that level, I guess you were used to it. The only pressure I was putting on myself was, to do as well as I could. Yeah, we ended up with a 4th place at those Olympics, which was really difficult. But I have to say, the experience of the Olympics in your home country was amazing. And on the day, we just had 3 better crews, cross the line before us. So it was very difficult, but I knew that I had enough in me for another 4 years to get to the next Olympic Games. So I set my sights on the next Games.
Right. And what sort of conversations were you having with your partner, Virginia, before these races? Just trying to understand what interactions happen between teammates to, get each other on the same wavelength.
Well, Virginia was quite experienced. She'd won a bronze medal the previous Olympic Games. So in 1996, Virginia won a bronze. So she was very experienced. So she was incredibly positive, and ready to go. Look, I felt like we'd done all the work. We were highly ranked athletes. I guess rowing is such a tight sport. There's only a couple of seconds between each crew. And by this stage at the Olympic Games, I'd moved from a heavyweight category to lightweight. And this is really interesting because lightweight rowing, you could put a blanket over the 8 competitors across the finish line. There's not much that divides us because we're the same weight, pretty much the same height. And the only thing really different between us is our mindset. So a 4th place, it was very narrow, missing out on 3rd. And again, like it's Atlanta, we were pretty disappointed, and so was our coach. But again, onwards and upwards, and you just got to keep moving forward was my attitude.
And what led you to decide to switch from heavyweight to the lightweight category?
Yeah, well, great question. I came back, I think it was 1998 from the World Championships as a heavyweight with a bronze medal. And I thought I would be set as a heavyweight athlete for the Sydney Olympic Games. I thought I'd be pretty much pre-selected. We'd done well. However, the new head coach in Australia had said he'd made some pretty strict criteria. I was too short, and my rowing ergos were just not strong enough. So I wouldn't even be considered for the heavyweight team, which at first was shocking. I thought, how dare someone? I've got a bronze medal. I'm not too short. But sometimes when you get those sorts of shocks in your life, you actually get a bit creative. And it was my domestic coach that said, how about you try and lose 13 kilos and go lightweight? So lightweight rowing for women is under 57 kilos and lightweight for men is under 72 kilos. And it's there so all nationalities can compete at the Games. So you seem to get a lot of great Asian crews in there, Chinese and Japanese, some of the Greeks. I don't know, just some fantastic smaller physiqued women in there. But you also get the tall, lanky Romanians, and myself, I'm 175 centimetres tall and raced at 57 kilos. So I was a bit scrawny, but from the moment I dropped the weight, I managed to drop the weight very quickly in about, I think, 8 or 9 weeks. I dropped a kilo a week, and I ended up winning the national time trial in Australia quite quickly. So I knew I was onto something. And then it was straight into medals on podiums, and it was the best thing I ever did in my rowing career, was go from heavyweight to lightweight. Yeah, great. It was fantastic to do.
Right.
So then going into Sydney Olympics, that was, I was really comfortable, and it went really well, apart from 4th place.
And how were you and Virginia trying to, deal with this 4th place finish? Like you mentioned, narrowly missing out on a medaling spot, especially in a home Olympics.
Yeah, look, it is so hard because we do things in Australia. I don't know if it's the same in India or all around the world, but we have a ticker tape parade. So the athletes are paraded down the centre of each capital city. So you hop on a plane, you go to a city and you parade down, sitting in a fancy car, waving and signing autographs. And every single, school kid comes up to you and they're ready to hand you their pen to get a signature. And the first thing they say is, did you get a medal? And as soon as you say, oh, I came 4th, they pull their pen back and look for the next medalist. So there was constant reminders that I was a second-class Olympian. But what I say to all future Olympians or future athletes, you must have a plan B. you must have something you're passionate about outside your sport, because these times are going to happen. They're only going to make you stronger. But if you can go and bury your head in a university degree, or bury your head in another sport, or bury your head in friendships or a passion or a hobby, it's so important. And that's what I did. I just threw myself back into my education degree, finished off my education degree, became a teacher while still training. But I really feel for the athletes that are professional athletes. They're paid to play sport, and they don't have a lot else going on because it has become their full-time job. So my advice to any up-and-coming athletes, make sure you've got a passion or a hobby going on outside of your sport, because you'll need it when times are not great in your sport to be able to switch off.
Yeah, and I think you use that plan B to really good effect after the Sydney Olympics, trying to not only just get over that fourth position, but also growing as an individual in something other than the sport itself. And you were also training at this time for Athens, but your training was marred by injury, and not just for you, but your partner as well. How did
That's
you
right.
how did you guys train mentally for Athens, considering that you couldn't train too much physically?
Yeah, look, when you're an elite athlete, you're always on the line. I think that is what you have to do as an elite athlete. You're on that line of injury all the time. You're pushing your body so hard that any moment, your body can just crumble on you. But I knew I had to do that, to get an Olympic medal. I knew, like in a rowing boat, the more reach I could get, the more length I could get from my stroke. So I was always extending my body in crazy places just to be able to get that little extra centimetre on the end of my blade. So I managed to develop a stress fracture. I actually fell off my bike prior to that, but then I think the combination of falling off a bike and then just extending the stroke so much ended up giving me a rib fracture. Also, my rowing partner, she fell off her bike as well. So she had 8 weeks out of the boat, which meant I just rode the single scull. But then I had 8 weeks out of the boat, which meant she had to row the single scull. The problem was the 6 to 8 weeks that I had off were directly before the Olympic Games. So it was at the time, it was quite a disaster. We had to call on our Olympic reserve, to replace me at the Games. However, she had the measles. She went home from Europe with the measles, unfortunately. So I had to race the Olympic Games with a fractured rib, which was a terrible place to be, especially when I'm so loyal to my country and I was so passionate about Australia being represented, and there I was on the start line with a slightly fractured rib. But that's where the sports psychologist came in. She was the first person that said to me, "Beauty, you've got a broken rib. It takes 6 weeks to heal a bone, and it's 8 weeks to the game. So this is just perfect. We're going to do 6 to 8 weeks of visualization, and we're going to train your brain." So I just sat in the boat park every single day with TheraBands or Dyna rubbers wrapped around a tree, just pulling those Dyna rubbers back and forth in the rowing position, trying to work my upper body just a little bit, keep my abs connected. And then I just had to visualize every single aspect of the rowing stroke: the catch, the finish, the leg drive, the recovery. I had to visualize the start line, the finish line, the middle of the race. Everything was perfected in my head, and I visualized for 8 weeks. So by the time I got to the Olympics, the experience was familiar. I'd been there before. I knew everything that was going to happen because I'd visualized that experience. So in the end, I guess we were so fit, my rowing partner and I, to take that much time off didn't hinder our performance too much, because when we got to the start line for the heat, for the Athens Olympic Games, it was an enormous tailwind, meaning it wasn't going to put much stress on my rib. And we broke the world record in the heat, which blew our mind. We just were so unsure how we were going to go, but to break the world record was just insane. It really was a dream come true. So that was the heat. Then we went into the semi-final, and again, outstanding result. We flew down that course again, a beautiful tailwind, which meant it was a nice short race, which meant my rib didn't hurt too much. And then it was the final, and I can remember reading the Australian newspapers that day because they were sent over to us, and the papers had already decided that we had won gold. They just thought, a world record, winning by 5 seconds in a rowing race, lightweight, that already determined that we'd won gold. So there was so much pressure. But when we got to that start line, it was a headwind, which meant the race was going to be about a minute longer, which made my rib just absolutely tingle. And we took off. We were in gold medal position for the first 500, all the way through to the 1,000. We were still leading the race. 1,500 meters, we were starting to slow down, got to silver. By the 1,750 meter mark of a 2,000 meter race, we're in bronze. And then we just got mowed down on the way to that finish line. So with 25 strokes to go, we managed to lose that bronze and cross the line in fourth. Now that was the nail in the coffin for me. That was just a killer. 2 fourth places at the Olympic Games just broke my heart. That really was something difficult to get through. Yeah.
Right. And how did you deal with that fourth place finish? I mean, like you mentioned, the training was obviously marred by injury up to the Olympics, and you guys still managed to break a world record in the heats and still narrowly missing out on the medal. What were the conversations with Virginia at that time?
Yeah, look, we just had to focus on the good stuff, that the Olympic records stood, and it actually still stands here today in 2021. The Olympic record is still there with our names on it, which is wonderful. I just had to focus on that. I had 12 years on the national team, but I really decided that it was time to hang up my oars and go back home. I just could not keep playing this game any longer for my mental well-being. It was only later that I started to realize the resilience that a fourth place brings. I do wonder if I'd won a gold medal, that perhaps I might have rested on my laurels and accepted a few sponsorship deals and not pushed myself any further. But when you've finished fourth, you're a nobody. You've got to go back and recreate something back at home. And after 12 years of traveling on a national team, there's not much at home. My friends by this stage had married, they'd all got houses, they'd bought cars, they finished their degrees, and I found myself with very little back home. So I really had to work very hard to make something of myself and use all the resilience I'd learned from rowing to develop into something, to make something of this.
And that resilience, I think, you came in really handy post the Athens Olympics, because you were diagnosed with a potentially fatal brain malformation, and you had to rely heavily on the resilience that you had built and all the mental habits that you had developed over the years as an athlete. How did you navigate those tough times?
Yeah, look, that was the most amazing thing. And I'm a big believer everything happens for a reason. Those fourth places, those ninth places in B finals, they all happen for a reason. And I'm a strong believer that all of the kilometers I had to do in the boat were setting me up to face this massive curveball. So, with 3 Olympics or 12 years on the national team, I thought that was tough. But what was really tough, what was to come, and that was facing brain surgery. So after stepping off the Olympic team, I met this fellow Olympian and we fell in love, and produced 2 children in world record pace, which was 2 children in 14 months, which was quite funny. But after the second child, I had a seizure. So I went in for an MRI. They realized I had a genetic brain malformation. So this was a big cluster of blood vessels on my brain called an AVM. And it had been there my whole life. And this thing was meant to bleed under pressure. So I was so fortunate that I managed to get 3 Olympics in without this time bomb exploding. The doctor gave me 2 choices. He said, we can leave it in there, but you'll have a fatal stroke in 10 years' time, or we can remove it with a craniotomy. Now, I didn't know what a craniotomy was. He said, it's pretty much where they cut open your skull and they remove part of your brain, and then they staple your skull back on. So the surgery came with a 15% risk of stroke, paralysis, coma, or death. So life had come to such a frightening halt because I had a 2-week-old newborn baby. I was terrified. I just didn't want to lose my life and have this newborn baby grow up without a mother. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And after much deliberation, I asked the surgeon if I could delay the surgery by 6 months. I just needed 6 months to get to know this newborn baby, breastfeed this baby, just feel like a mother, and also focus on the quality and not the longevity of life. I went back to thinking about what I was grateful for. I went back to feeling just how fortunate my life was, and just having 6 months of joy, just trying to realize how lucky I am to have this time. The time came to have the surgery, and the surgery took 7 hours, and the craniotomy was successful in the fact that they removed the AVM. However, I stroked in the surgery, and I woke up paralyzed down one side. So I was an athlete in an infant's body. I just stepped off the Olympic team, and now I couldn't even feed myself. I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even hold my children. And it was difficult. And the only way I knew how to get better was to imagine I was an Olympic athlete and imagine I was training for the Olympics. And I had to, I guess, go deep into my mindset and convince myself that I was at the Australian Institute of Sport and I was not in a rehab centre. And the patients next to me were my athlete, my teammates. And I just had to convince myself that I had to train every day, and I had to train so hard to be able to learn how to walk, dress, and feed. And it was terrifying, but I guess that mindset, when you've experienced visualization, and once you've really convinced yourself, I guess, that you can improve, that's where I had to go. And it took 4 months living in a rehabilitation centre, and then another 8 months at home before I was discharged from the hospital system. But there were so many valuable lessons learned in that year. I tell you what, I learned more in that year living with elderly stroke patients than I have in my whole life. It was, I have to say, it sounds crazy, but it was the most incredible life-changing experience, being paralysed and learning to walk again, and so rewarding, more rewarding than 3 Olympics combined. I'm more proud that I got through that than any of the athletic achievements that I've been through. I just learned that tomorrow's not guaranteed, and that's the most important lesson, that anything can change, and we have to make the most of today, because tomorrow is definitely not guaranteed, and your athletic identity is not everything. There needs to be more to life than just sport. It was an amazing experience.
That's wonderful. And I think, like you had mentioned, and I'd also read this on the internet earlier, where it is almost not guaranteed that individuals can teach themselves all those skills from the very beginning all over again. But I'd also read your interview where you mentioned you relied on your experience as an Olympian and also the mindset that you had built over all these years to keep going through that time and teach yourselves all these skills all over again, but came out of it feeling much better physically as well as mentally. So I think really, really big kudos to you for this. And I think it's really inspiring for all of us to see this in action.
Yeah. And the journaling was a big part. Again, finding those daily habits, writing down 3 things you're grateful for, making meaning of obstacles, and, just really trying to journal everything that's positive going on, because I think you can rewire your brain. I think when you're in that situation, you're on the verge of depression. It's really difficult, living in an elderly stroke rehab centre. But if I could just write down the good things that were happening, or anything that I was grateful for every day. And there were days where I couldn't find any gratitude, but I would write down perhaps that I really enjoyed eating the peas, on the plate. Or so I was able to scoop up the peas and put them in my mouth. That was something I was grateful for. So it doesn't matter what it is. It could just be a sunrise, but those are the things that keep us going in really tough times.
Yeah. And gratitude and looking at obstacles as opportunities are 2 of the 4 reasons behind your success. The 4 pillars that form the acronym GOLD, something that you teach to your athletes and students so often. Could you talk to me about this system a little in detail?
Yeah, I felt during my athletic career, I was really I came up with an acronym in my athletic career that was GOLD, and it was something that kept me going. So, when I talk about GOLD, the G stands for gratitude, and it was just about writing down 3 things that went well, not 3 things you're grateful for, just what's going well. And it can be anything, it can be a sunrise, or it can be that perhaps, your coach was happy with you, or the warm-up went well. But then I was able to transfer that into rehab again, and write down a couple of things that went well. The O stands for obstacles. So making meaning of obstacles, and talking to everyone in the stroke rehab unit, and talking to other people that have experienced tragedy, it's when we make sense of obstacles, then I think we have a good chance of recovering and ending up with, I guess, that recovering in such a way where you can find growth from tragedy. And I really think that's a big one. And any obstacle that we face, we need to try and figure out why it happened and make meaning of that obstacle. So that's another one that's really important. And then the L stands for leadership. And I'm a big believer from leading from within. So making sure that that leadership is authentic. And I really learned that mostly in rehab, because there I was coming out of rehab, and I was terrified of going outside into the real world because I walked with a limp, I spoke with a slur, and my handwriting was illegible because I was left-handed and I stroked on the left side. I was really ashamed because I was once an Olympian and now I had a drool and a stutter. So a friend of mine gave me this bowl, and it was a cracked bowl, but it was glued back together with gold. And she said it was a Japanese art of wabi-sabi, meaning that you need to find beauty in imperfection. And now that you might seem you're broken, you need to now see yourself as something that's quite unique and authentic and beautiful and has a story to tell. And I think we all have stories to tell. We've all got our imperfections, but that's what makes us a leader from within. And that's what gives us our leadership, our authentic, unique thing. So lead from within is really important. And it also comes into that clarity and meditation and getting to know yourself and making sure that you connect and have clarity. So lead from within was quite important. And then the last one was daily habits. And as I mentioned, it's that small habits that we do every day compound over time, I guess, to change a life. So I made sure in my journaling, and even today I've developed a journal that hits those 4 pillars, where each day I write down something that went well. I perhaps, how did I overcome an obstacle? I might journal that down. Did I meditate today? Did I lead from within? Did I connect, with someone? And then lastly, it might be, what are my goals for tomorrow? What habits do I want to develop? So I've managed to tailor make a journal now for myself, just to make sure those 4 acronyms that stood me so well in the Olympics and stood me so well in rehabilitation continued through today. They're really important things. But I think that everyone needs to, have a real look at those 4 acronyms and make sure that you are meeting those sorts of goals in your life. Yeah.
That's really quality feedback and insight on how to journal. I think it's really, really important, not just for aspiring athletes, but everybody otherwise as well. And I think I'd love to take that insight to my way of journaling, because I'm still trying to settle in on what do I journal about. I know how the day has gone, but finding that key indicators and cues on what to reflect on and what goes into the book, because that is what then gets recorded and sticks around for the years.
Yeah, and so I ended up making one. I ended up coming up with 3 or 4 prompting questions, and this journal sits beside my bed. And I make sure I answer those 3 or 4 questions before I go to bed, because we know, well-being is no different, or athletic performance is no different. If you want to be good at it, you have to practice it. So if we can rewire our brain every day with those sorts of positive questions and positive answers, then I think we can reshape ourselves and retrain ourselves and rewire ourselves and develop new habits. Yeah, so I've got these journals on my website, and it's just something I came up with over the COVID period, because I had so many friends, family that were struggling. And I think it is good just to keep yourself accountable and I think it's just the easiest way to sort of reflect positive at the end of the day, which is so important for all of us.
Right. And I've read that you've been using these to pass on these learnings to other aspiring athletes as well as other students, and in your role as an educator. I was keen to understand, what does the future hold for Sally? Any interesting projects that you are working on that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I'm writing a book, and it started as a way to make meaning of what happened, but it's become more of a book about sharing all the tips and skills and tricks that I gained at the Olympic Games that also transferred into recovering from a stroke. And it's been a great way to, as I mentioned, make meaning of such an obstacle. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that book because I really think it might be able to help a lot of people that have experienced challenging times, or even for people that have never experienced such challenges, to understand how your life can change in an instant. And you do need some tools and strategies ready to go, because none of us are going to get away without any scars. We're all going to have a story to tell at the end. And I guess the sooner we can bounce back from whatever's going to happen to us, the better we're off. And that is the definition of resilience. So I'm writing a book. I've also put together this journal with prompting questions. And then the other thing that I'm really enjoying doing at the moment, I have young children, 9 and 10 years of age, and we sit down for dinner every night, and we've created some conversation cards. And my kids are very excited to take a card out of the box and ask a question. And they're like the questions in the journal. Things like, what are you proud of today? Or what went well today? Or did you do an act of kindness for someone? Or who do you appreciate and why? So lovely. I'm just trying to, ensure that their brains are wired for positive, I guess, education, and also that they will develop the best resilience, because as mentioned, we're all going to have a curveball in our life, and it's just about how we get back up from that curveball. And I'm pretty passionate about the students, the athletes, my own children, my family, my friends, that we can be as resilient as possible, especially in these unique times that we're all facing right now.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a real pleasure having you today, Sally. And I leave this conversation with a renewed sense of hope and inspiration from you, and another eagerness to instill the daily habits like you mentioned, because there will always be a time where we will need to rely on these habits. And I know it's never too late to start these things. And I definitely leave this conversation with wanting to instill these as soon as possible. So thank you so much for taking out the time today and sharing your wonderful journey with us.
Yeah, fantastic. And I wish all our listeners the best. And it's been fantastic being part of your podcast.
It's our real pleasure. Thank you so much, Sally. Wow, that was something, eh? Sally has overcome so many obstacles along the way and lived an inspiring life, which is why people listen when she talks about her principles of GOLD. G for gratitude, O for obstacles as opportunities, L for lead from within, and D for daily habits determining our future. She is not teaching the principles, she is living them and showing us that it works. I definitely leave this conversation feeling a renewed sense of hope and gratitude towards life. If you want to know more about Sally's work, check out her website sallycallie.com, which is mentioned in our show notes as well. As promised, here's more about our partnership with Zenkai Sports, the new disruptor in the performance apparel world. Zenkai utilizes a brand new technology that repels liquids, keeping you cooler during intense activity as the sweat evaporates naturally off your skin. This allows you to regulate body temperature easily and push yourself harder, as Zenkai clothing harnesses the power of your sweat. Sweat is our friend, keep it on you. Zenkai Sports is also the only performance apparel company which is cotton based. All of their gear is over 65% cotton, with some pieces over 95%. Cotton is biodegradable, feels great against your skin, and is much better for our environment than synthetic based apparel. Please go to www.zenkaisports.com to check out their cool range of products that can give you that extra boost in your performance. And while you are at it, use the code TGP20 for a 20% discount off your entire order. You can also find all these details in our show notes of this episode, so don't forget to check it out. So that's it for this episode, folks. Thank you for tuning into the Gifted Podcast. I have been your host, Niraj Mulani. A gentle reminder, you can find us as The Gifted on your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and Google. Keep following us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Gifted Podcast, and on Twitter as The Gifted Pod, so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Thank you once again for listening, and I'll see you next week with another special episode. Until then, stay well and keep your masks on.